Okay. You might be a redneck. If you've ever been struck in your own driveway, if you referred to your dog as the dishwasher, your car is made out of 17 others and each part is a different color. You repair your car in the auto parts store parking lot. I was just down at Auto Parts here a little while back and bought some mats for my truck, and there was a couple of people out there working on their cars out there. I thought it was interesting. You keep track of all belt holders in all the wrestling leagues. You got married in the family car in a drive-through chapel. Let me see here. You might be a redneck if you have a picture of Johnny Cash, Willie Nelson, or Elvis over your fireplace. You just bought an 8-track player to put in your car. There are 4 or more cars up on blocks in your front yard. It's easier to spray weed killer on your lawn than to mow it. You've ever climbed a water tower with a bucket of paint to defend your sister's honor. The tobacco chewers in your family aren't just men. Okay, I got a couple of those, but I'm going to pass them so I'll have enough time so we can have some questions if you want to. And before we begin, Christ died on the cross. They say he took on the nature of Satan. He went to hell for 3 days, and then he resurrected a born-again man. Okay? So we're going to look at that tonight. And it says there at the top of your page there, Paul said in Galatians 1, 6 and 8, I marvel that you are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Christ and to another gospel. And by the way, that's what's happened here with a lot of these televangelists. A lot of people are following them. And so they teach this and people just go right into it. And but though we are an angel from heaven, preach any other gospel unto you than that which we have preached unto you, let him be accursed. They had left the grace gospel. God wanted any who did this to be accursed. So it's a serious business, isn't it? By the way, why would God want that? Because they'll try to get people to follow him, and they'll remain lost and take people to hell. Right? So that's why. Today we have many megachurch leaders and television evangelists who deny the sufficiency of Christ's cross. And then they preach he had to do more. And that's called heresy. Amen? If he had to do more than the cross, then it's heresy. Yes. B, the worst of the false gospel preachers are the Word of Faith movement. This includes Benny Hinn, Creflo Dollar, Kenneth Hagin. He's dead now, but they follow his teachings. Kenneth Copeland, Jesse Duplantis, Frederick K.C. Price, Joyce, Meyers, and so on. There are others, I just couldn't name everybody, but you see these on television most time, don't you? Whether they're on Trinity, Daystar, or even our station out of South Bend here. What is true according to the Bible? It means that Christ, in his sacrificial death on the cross, on his cross, dealt completely with man's problem of sin. Christ, in his body on the cross, redeemed sinners from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. Number 3, Christ, who is sinless, was accounted as sinful. Now, let me just say something before I go any further. He was counted as sinful. Christ did not become literal sin. Okay? That's important. As sinful, because all of our sin was laid to his account. Just like Adam's sin went to his account, passed on to all his kids. Upon taking our sin away, he then gave us his righteousness and imputed it to all sinners' accounts who believed, making us now righteous before God. See, it is the cross's doctrine that calls out to all lost sinners that salvation is by grace alone, through the sinless sacrifice of God's Son, Christ, on the cross. It is at the cross, not in hell, that salvation is either lost or won. We're going to show that as we go through this. D, the Word of Faith movement, also known as prosperity preaching, has transferred the saving work of Christ from the cross to the dungeons of hell. See, up here, what they've done, they've taken away that the cross is sufficient, and they've taken that salvation plan away, and they've added more. Their teaching provides another gospel, making them accursed by God. Their teaching, number one, they say that Christ was recreated on the cross from divine to demonic. Think that through. Jesus became demonic on the cross. You ought to be ready to fight for something. You know what I mean? This means Jesus took on the nature of Satan himself on the cross. Hinn says, ladies and gentlemen, the serpent is a symbol of Satan. Jesus Christ knew the only way he would stop Satan is by becoming one in nature with him. You say, what did you say? What blasphemy is this? No, you hear this. He did not take my sin. He became my sin. Sin is the nature of hell. Sin is what made Satan. It was sin that made Satan. Jesus said, I'll be sin. I'll go to the lowest place. I'll go to the origin of it. I won't just take part in it. I'll be the totality of it. And by the way, before I read any more, chapter and verse. Okay? When Jesus became sin, sir, he took it from A to Z and said, no more. Think about this. He became flesh, that flesh might become like him. He became death so that dying man can live. He became sin so sinners can be righteous in him. He became one with the nature of Satan so all those who had the nature of Satan can partake of the nature of God. And by the way, man does not have the nature of Satan. Jesus Christ was made a little lower than the angels, where man is. Man's a sinner, but he doesn't have the nature of Satan. That's an angelic being. And Christ didn't become an angelic being. Okay? Hagin said, spiritual death means something more than separation from God. Spiritual death also means having Satan's nature. Jesus tasted death, spiritual death. By the way, that is wrong. For every man. Hagin's disciple, Fred K.C. Price, said, even in a bizarre way, that Jesus Christ was recreated spiritually. Not on the cross, like the others of the Word of Faith movement state, but rather Christ changed in the Garden of Gethsemane. That's before the cross. Price said somewhere between the time Jesus was nailed to the cross And when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, somewhere in there, he died spiritually. Personally, I believe it was while he was in the garden. Isn't that crazy? Kenneth Copeland said, the righteousness of God was made to be sin. He accepted the sin nature of Satan in his own spirit. At that moment that he did so, he cried, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? You don't know what happened at the cross, but he does. Why do you think Moses, upon the instruction of God, raised the serpent up on the pole instead of a lamb? That used to bug me. I said, why in the world would you want to put a snake up there? The sign of Satan. Why didn't you put a lamb on that pole? And the Lord said, problem, because it was a sign of Satan that was hanging on the cross. He said, I accepted in my own spirit spiritual death, and the light was turned off. In conversation he said he had with God, Copeland says Jesus became a sign of Satan when hanging on the cross. What an awful thing to say about the Son of God. Do you know that? That is blasphemy. Here's the answer to these things these people just said. In the Old Testament, when one would sin, a sacrifice called a sin offering was required in order to cover the transgression. In Leviticus, it says the offering had to be without defect. Animals having any flaw that was serious were rejected as unacceptable for sacrifice. Since those Old Testament sacrifices foreshadowed Christ, one final sacrifice on the cross, we know Christ was offered without spot or blemish, and in no way could he have become one in nature with Satan. On the cross, he was the spotless and sinless. He was spotless and sinless, no defect. Hebrews 9, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God. Don't you think having the nature of Satan would be a spot? Amen? Okay. 1 Peter 1:19, but with the precious blood of Christ as of a lamb without blemish, without spot. According to Leviticus 6, you can look those verses up sometime, the sin offering was the most holy before and after its death. So with Christ, he was holy prior to the cross, on the cross, and after the cross. He never ceased being God. Amen? The Word of Faith preachers try to use 2 Corinthians 5:21 as proof that Jesus became sin and thus a satanic being on the cross. The answer: to become sin, to say that Christ was transformed literally into sin, is to strip Christ of who he was, is, and ever will be. That verse means God reckoned our sin to Christ's account. God put our sin on Christ's bill. Our sin was imputed, was charged to Jesus' account. Made means God caused, gave over, offered up his Son as a sacrifice for our sin. He absorbed, now get this, he absorbed the wrath of God on the cross as the final payment for our sin. On the cross, as the sinless, spotless sacrifice. The Son of God was treated as sin.